There is a kind of silence that settles into a marriage, not loud, not jarring, but soft and almost imperceptible. Like a fine dust gathering in corners, it goes unnoticed until one day, you realize the air feels different. Heavier. Still. I didn't notice it at first. I thought the quiet was peace. Our mornings were filled with the same familiar rhythms, the hum of the kettle, the rustle of the newspaper, the scent of Alexei's cologne lingering in the hallway as he kissed my forehead and stepped out the door. I used to love those mornings. I used to feel grounded by them. But over time, I began to feel as though I was moving through someone else's life. The steps, the motions, even the smiles, they belonged to a version of me that I was slowly forgetting. Alexei didn't change. He was still kind. Still thoughtful. He would bring home my favorite pastries without needing to ask, would warm my side of the bed when I stayed up late. But even as he loved me in all the same ways, I began to wonder, did he truly see me anymore? Or had we become two shadows of ourselves, repeating a dance I didn't have the answer. And I didn't want to ask. Because questions like that once spoken are hard to take back. They linger in the air, even after the silence returns. So I smiled. I kept smiling. But not far. Not just enough to notice the quiet. And wonder if there was more. There was no single moment when I felt myself slipping away, no sharp word or sudden absence. It was quieter than that, almost gentle. Like watching sunlight fade through a window, not realizing when dusk arrived. Alexei and I still talked, about groceries, his projects at work, the leaking faucet in the kitchen. We laughed, too. There was still warmth between us, still kindness. But it felt as though we were skimming the surface of a deeper lake we no longer dared to explore. Some evenings, I would watch him from across the room, the curve of his shoulders as he sat at his desk, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, and I would ache. Not from dislike, not from anger, but from longing. For what, I didn't know. Perhaps to be seen in a new light, to feel a pulse of something that wasn't comfort, but fire. I tried to shake it. I told myself I was tired, restless, that this was just a passing phase, a season. I buried myself in errands, calls with friends, the quiet rituals of the home we had built. I filled the silence with motion. And then I met him. Not in a way that screamed danger, not with any intentions. It was by chance, at a cafe, during an afternoon I'd set aside for myself. He noticed the book I was reading, struck up a conversation. Harmless, I thought. Just words. Just another person moving through the world. But words have weight, and some conversations leave traces. His voice was different, curious, engaged, warm in a way that felt new. I remember how I laughed at something he said, and how, for a moment, I felt myself come alive in a way I hadn't in months, maybe longer. It was nothing. I told myself that. But as I walked home, Alexei's world waiting for me, I couldn't stop replaying that moment, the ease, the spark, the way I had felt like someone else entirely. Not better. Not worse. Just seen. I told no one about the encounter. Not because I had anything to hide, at least, that's what I told myself, but because I didn't have the words for what it had awakened in me. It wasn't about him, not yet. It was about me. About the way I felt walking home, the crisp air filling my lungs, the world seeming sharper, more vivid, as though I had been sleeping and only just woken up. I slipped back into my life like I always had. Alexei greeted me with his gentle smile, offered me tea, asked if I'd had a nice afternoon. I nodded, gave him the answer he expected. He kissed my cheek and returned to his book. That night, I lay awake, watching the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. A part of me wanted to wake him, to tell him everything, how I felt like a shadow of myself, how I missed the way we used to talk, not just speak. I wanted to ask if he felt it too, the distance, the slow unraveling of something once strong. But I didn't. Instead, I lay still, the words heavy in my throat. Days passed. Then a week. The memory of that conversation at the cafe stayed with me, lingering like a soft melody I couldn't quite forget. I returned to the same place, under the same pretense of solitude. I didn't expect to see him again. Perhaps I hoped I wouldn't. But he was there. He remembered my name. Remembered the book. His smile was easy, not invasive, not pressing. We spoke again, about nothing, about everything. He asked questions that made me think, made me laugh, made me feel like I was being gently unraveled, layer by careful layer. I told myself I had control. That it was just a friendship, a harmless escape. But deep down, I knew I was walking a fragile line, one step closer to something I didn't fully understand, but could already feel pulling me in. That night, when Alexei reached for my hand in his sleep, as he always did, I closed my eyes and willed myself to feel only that touch. Only that warmth. But part of me was elsewhere. And I didn't know how to bring it back. I don't know when I began anticipating those meetings, when the thought of the cafe, of him, became a kind of tether, something to look forward to amid the quiet days and familiar rituals of my life with Alexei. It crept in, slowly. A shift in my mornings, a little more care with my hair, a touch of color on my lips, chosen not for Alexei, but for someone else. Someone who saw me differently. Not as a wife, a partner, a constant, but as a question yet to be answered. I still fulfilled my role. I prepared meals, folded his shirts, laughed at his jokes. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, I was splitting. One foot anchored in the life I had built, the other stepping, cautiously, guiltily, into a world beyond it. With him, things felt lighter. Not easier, but freer. Our conversations stretched long, meandering from books to memories to dreams we barely admitted to ourselves. He never asked too much, never pushed. But in his eyes, I saw something that both thrilled and terrified me, hunger, yes, but also understanding. A mirror of my own longing. I told myself it was just a friendship. That I was entitled to a sliver of light in my days. That I hadn't crossed any lines. But I had. Not with my body, but with my heart. I thought of Alexei more often now, not out of love, but from the weight of betrayal unspoken. He hadn't changed. Still left me little notes on the fridge, still kissed my forehead at night. Still asked me how my days were. I answered, always, with a smile. Lies can wear the gentlest faces. That night, I lay in bed, his arm draped over me as I stared into the darkness, and for the first time, I wondered, was it possible to love someone and still betray them? Or had I already stopped loving, and was only now brave enough to admit it? The truth pressed heavy on my chest. I closed my eyes. And didn't sleep. There comes a moment when standing still feels like falling. When the weight of indecision becomes its own kind of betrayal. I felt it growing inside me. Every time Alexei smiled at me with that quiet trust. Every time he looked at me like I was something just out of reach, waiting to be claimed. I existed between them, pulled in two directions, neither path clear, neither without cost. I told myself I was still in control. That no real line had been crossed. But what is real when your thoughts are no longer your own? When you imagine someone else's voice as you stir soup at the stove? When you think of someone else's laugh, even as you sit across from your husband at dinner? Alexei noticed something. I could feel it in his touch, the way his hand lingered a moment longer, as if searching for a signal. His eyes lingered too, full of quiet questions he didn't ask. Perhaps he feared the answers. I feared them too. One evening, after Alexei had gone to bed, I stood alone in the living room, staring out into the night. The city lights flickered distantly, indifferent to my turmoil. My phone sat heavy in my hand. A single message from him, simple but charged, thinking of you. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. The guilt was a constant thrum beneath my skin. I wanted Alexei to touch me and make it disappear, to draw me back into the world we had made. But when he did, when he kissed me, I felt hollow. Not because he lacked passion, but because I no longer met him where he stood. I was drifting. And I didn't know how to stop. Or if I even wanted to. The days blurred, each one layered with a fragile calm that I feared would shatter at any moment. I lived in dual worlds. By daylight, I was the wife Alexei knew, the woman he loved. By twilight, I was someone else entirely, haunted by emotions I could neither deny nor fully claim. He wrote again. The other man. A message, short, thoughtful, heavy with things left unsaid. I wish things were different. I read it under the table, with Alexei just a few steps away, humming as he made coffee. I felt like a thief in my own life, stealing moments, stealing glances, stealing emotions that didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But my silence was not a severance, it was a pause, pregnant with possibility. I had begun to ask myself the questions I once feared. What did I want? Was this hunger for something new, something untamed, worth unraveling the life I had built? Was it passion I craved, or simply escape, from the woman I had become, from the roles I had slipped into like second skin? Alexei still touched me with affection, but I saw the doubt in his eyes, like a shadow flickering across his love. He sensed I was drifting, but he didn't confront it. Maybe he didn't want the truth. Maybe he still believed in the woman he married. One afternoon, I walked alone, the city humming around me, and found myself at the cafe. Our cafe. I didn't plan it. My feet led me there like they knew something my mind refused to say. He was there. Our eyes met, his face lit with something like hope, mine shadowed with something like fear. We didn't speak for a long time. We didn't need to. He reached out, not to touch me, but simply to offer a place for me to land, should I choose to fall. I didn't fall. Not that day. But the edge was closer than ever. And I didn't know how much longer I could stand on it. The days grew heavier, burdened by the words I couldn't say and the choices I refused to make. I lived in suspension, between a man who loved me without question, and another who made me feel like a question worth exploring. Alexei's eyes lingered on me more now, not with suspicion, but with quiet hurt, like he was searching for pieces of me that had begun to fade. He didn't ask why I was distant. He didn't press when I pulled away. His love was patient, still, and that patience became its own form of ache. I could feel his restraint, the fear that if he looked too closely, I might disappear. I began to wonder, had I already left? Had I already crossed the boundary, even without a touch, without a kiss? The answer haunted me. One evening, I found myself standing by the window again, the city lights flickering like stars just out of reach. My phone buzzed in my hand, a message from him, simple but suffocating, "I need to see you." I didn't reply. But I didn't turn away. Instead, I sat down, alone, and began to write. Not to him. Not to Alexei. To myself. For the first time, I tried to untangle the knots in my heart, to understand how love could feel like safety and suffocation all at once. How desire could bloom from loneliness, how betrayal could root itself not in passion, but in absence of self, of connection, of something lost along the way. I had thought I was choosing between two men. But the truth was, I was trying to find the woman I used to be, the one I had abandoned, piece by piece, in the name of love, of comfort, of routine. In the silence of that night, I knew, a choice would come. But I was not ready. Not yet. Years have passed since the nights of questions and silences, the moments that hung in the air like unspoken confessions. Life, as it often does, moved forward with an inevitable momentum. Alexei and I, still bound by time and memory, continue to share this quiet space we've carved together. The space that once felt like a cage now feels, well, different. Not as comfortable as it once did, but not suffocating, either. We have both changed. I know that. Maybe not in the ways I imagined at the time, but enough for us to be different people from who we were back then. Alexei still holds me in ways I never expected, quiet, patient, as always, but now there's a distance between us that neither of us acknowledges aloud. It is there, in the things we no longer share, in the stories we no longer tell. As for the other man, I never saw him again after that final message. I never truly answered his call, not in the way he hoped. Part of me wonders what would have happened had I made a different choice. But the truth is, I don't know. And, in some strange way, I think that's okay. There are moments when I feel the ghost of that question, the one that gnawed at me, resurface. Did I choose the right life? Did I stay because it was safe, or because I was truly willing to? But I've learned that life is less about definitive answers and more about the living of it. About the way we weave our choices into the days that follow. I'm still learning to accept that some answers remain hidden, even from ourselves. That sometimes, the real question isn't whether we made the right decision, but whether we can live with what we've chosen. I am living. And so is Alexei. And perhaps that is enough.